Now, fortunately, we have come up with some good solutions to problems like this on Earth that can be applied to the moon. So, for instance, we found ways of financing infrastructure to create economies in very challenging environments like developing nations and nations recovering from war. And in many cases, to finance this infrastructure, governments play a role by buying an equity investment in the project or offering loan guarantees or other loans. But to really reduce risk in a very challenging environment, you'll see nations use a variety of tools like this. And many nations have even formed development banks like the World Bank and development finance institutions like the World Bank's International Finance Corporation. And individual nations will have these entities like the UK's British International Investment. And these organizations are designed to lower the investment risk for major projects so that the private sector can help fund them. So they provide loans and guarantees and can even make equity investments, buying partial ownership in the project as a minority shareholder in order to lower the risk profile so that a lot more private sector capital can enter. And we also have economic development boards and corporations in many countries and cities around the world that play a very similar role within a given locality. We've also found ways throughout history of developing standards and effective enforcement systems from the bottom up, even ones that worked across borders. So international maritime law and modern commercial law both emerged from merchants or ship captains and port communities that devised rules themselves, even developed courts and enforcement mechanisms, and only later were these rules codified by nations or admiralty courts into law. But they proved to be very effective and actually form the basis of the laws that we currently rely on, including to run a global financial system. Also, natural resource regulations, like for mining and fishing, were often first developed by the miners and fishermen themselves instead of by a government creating them in advance. The first mining claims registry was developed first informally by miners in the American West who had to develop a solution for avoiding conflict with each other. And later on, the government of Nevada and the United States government ended up adopting that mining claims registry into law, and so it became a national registry. So even in situations like that, where there wasn't a state laying down rules in advance, we have seen people form institutions themselves from the bottom up. But this doesn't always just happen automatically. There are a number of circumstances, as I'm sure you can imagine, where people have failed to reach agreements and devise solutions like this. But we can build frameworks that make it more likely for solutions to emerge from the bottom up. And there's a great economic literature, especially by Elinor Ostrom, that provides some useful lessons here. We can also learn some lessons about previous histories of dominance by major mercantilist empires and company states that formed huge monopolies in the 16 and 1700s that dominated trade across vast regions of the world. But even as this was happening, there were free ports, areas where people from around the world could come and transact and trade freely without restrictive rules designed to favor these monopolistic companies. And many of these areas, especially as like Hong Kong emerged in the 19th century and Singapore in the 19th century, they became very prosperous over the long run, much more prosperous than many of the other areas that were under these more restrictive regimes. And so because they developed institutions that promoted rights protections and free trade and enforcement and dispute resolution mechanisms. So the Lunar Development Cooperative combines and adapts elements from many of these lessons to overcome the challenges to creating a lunar economy. It's designed to de-risk investments in lunar infrastructure by blending sovereign and private investment capital. It's designed to create a framework that makes it much more likely that operators on the moon from different nations will be able to create effective institutions that manage resources and reduce conflict. And it's able to create prosperous, open, and collaborative spaces, even if much of the moon is dominated by a single nation or exclusive monopolies that are preventing cooperation and free trade.